Oh, and we're live. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's Science Fiction Saturday here. It's 18th of December, 2021. I'm not sure if anybody's there joining me out there in YouTube land, but I'm just back with the dogs and, as usual, a bit out of breath. Excuse me. I'll try and settle a wee bit. I hope you're all keeping well wherever you are. And just tonight, we're only going to be on for an hour tonight, just to run through a few things that we're going to be doing on the station over the next year after Christmas, and also really to start having a wee chat about a few things that are in the footnotes of the PhD. Excuse me, very bad throat tonight. Pardon me. Get some of those precious fluids in me there. Hopefully that'll sort it out a wee bit. So yeah, pardon me. Just off to start off with then tonight, just get through a few announcements. And if anybody's joining me from last night, we were having a wee chat on Monday, the 20th of December. That's this Monday. At 9 p.m. GMT, we'll be doing our first ever book launch here on the Science Fiction Station. And it'll be, the book is, in fact, Women's Agency in the Dune Universe by Dr. Cara Kennedy. So if any of you would like to join us at 9 o'clock, we'll be going through a sort of chat about the book. Sorry, we've got noise coming at us from every direction here tonight. One of the joys of broadcasting from home. Let's just lock the windows and shut the doors. Sorry about that. There we go. We'll probably get off to a bit of a better start there, but the dogs are a bit unsettled tonight. They made a bit of an appearance last night on here. So, sorry, just to recap then, well, we've got our sort of senses about us. We'll be doing a wee book launch on Monday, the 20th of December. That's this Monday at 9 p.m. GMT. And the book is Women's Agency in the Dune Universe. So a must for all Dune fans, serious Dune fans. And this work features heavily the Bene Gesserit, I think. So in particular, if you're a fan of the Bene Gesserit, this might be for you. And I suppose the other thing was just to announce a wee bit that we're planning on doing a few more audiobooks over Christmas to get those up and done. And then we're hopefully getting back on track with the Science Fiction Station. Thanks, love. in the new year, excuse me. So as much as we do a Science Fiction Friday for a bit of a chat usually about Dune and all things Dune, we've been asked to do a book club in relation to Dune to work through it. To help some people with their understanding of the book. So we're going to be making that a part of our Saturdays, I think. We're trying to work out a timetable at the minute and hopefully give you a wee announcement on a structure to the week in the new year. But we'll be hoping to have a Sci-Fi Friday as usual, bit of a chat, etc. And then hopefully a book club either on a Saturday or a Monday. And at the same time, we'll be hoping to keep up our output of hopefully one audiobook a week. And we'd like to get back to making our more sort of more into our sci-fi videos as well. So we're going to be looking at trying to bring some really, really good science fiction to you once we hit the new year, basically post-Christmas period. And we're going to be doing a wee bit of work on Alfred Bester and two really important novels, The Demolished Man and a book that's known by two different titles. In Britain, it's generally known as Tiger, and within the States and elsewhere, I think it's also known as The Star's My Destination. So if you're a bit of a fan of quality science fiction, the general idea is that if you think of Dune as the best science fiction book ever written, which is debatable, generally within the popular consensus, the book that comes in at number 2 is Tiger. It's a powerhouse of a book, absolutely brilliant. Sometimes described as the Iliad of science fiction. It's considered unfilmable. Another one of these books that's considered unfilmable and has an awful lot in common with Alexander Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo, for example. But it's a cracking book, and certainly wasn't. Alfred Bester wasn't easy to get a hold of, and where I was living when I was young. So I think he went underneath a lot of people's radar here in the UK for some reason. I might be wrong. And we're also thinking on having a wee look at breaking into the world of Philip K. Dick. And I think we want to sort of, as much as we've done a couple of audiobooks by Philip K. Dick, we want to come in punching heavy. And we think we're going to do some work on Ubik. And we're even considering making some Ubik adverts. If you know the book Ubik, it's got adverts at the start of each chapter. for these ubiquitous products. So we're going to be having a look at Philip K. Dick's Ubik quite soon, once we've done our work on Alfred Bester. And I think the two authors go together quite well. I think their writing sensibilities have that there's that real science fiction, but there's also, what does it mean to be human, and that questioning that sense of reality, I think. And again, just sort of looking at books that are kind of outside of what we would call the popular science fiction, if you like, more kind of counterculture type of stuff, things that, the works that kind of belong in what we would call the new wave. Pardon me. So that's just a wee bit of info, and also just to let you know that we're planning on bringing you a few more. We're opening it up, I suppose, because we've really been dealing with science fiction literature and the advent of the Dune movie, and I suppose all the hype that's been leading up to that. So we're looking forward to sort of exploring some of our favorite science fiction films with you guys. Excuse me. And well, not just science fiction films, I suppose. We've got anime, cartoons, animated films, comic books, a whole range of media to look at. And particular, just I have my own particular favorites. I'm sure we all do. And old science fiction that used to be, I suppose, the Saturday morning serials would have been a big part of my childhood as sort of repeats on the TV. So I don't know. I'd be quite interested to take on a wee sort of journey through the science fiction films and TV shows and cartoons and anime and comic books as well that mean a fair bit to me, I suppose, because they've done quite a bit to shape my life and my understanding of things. And I suppose one other thing is that we're hopefully bringing you some bizarre. We're going to be presenting at some point in the new year, at the moment, what we're calling Doc Sloan's Tales of Terror, Unbelievable Terror and Stupidity from the Troubles. And we're going to present some very interesting things to you guys, hopefully just as a wee side project, which will culminate in the use of how to use science fiction as a philosophy and a weapon in life, if you like. One other thing I was going to talk about at some point, I don't know if we've opened up our station into a bit of genre fiction, because we do like that kind of H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard. Big fan of Finn de Siegel fiction, and it often takes us into the gothic, the horror, fantasy, these genres as well. And as I often like to point out, mythology is a big part of all of these things. So we're going to open up our scope a little bit, and I think it's interesting because a lot of the guys that we will look at, whether they're regarded as horror writers or fantasy writers, etc., often dip their toe into the pond of science fiction. So we're going to have a wee bit of a look at hopefully some Edgar Allan Poe as well, I think, and Mark Twain, I think, will be big on my list. So that's just a wee bit of an idea of what's to come this year. If anybody has any questions or comments for me, by the way, fire away. We'll hopefully be doing, as I said, a few more videos, sort of more back to our normal style of work. Talking about science fiction in general. We've presented you with a very brief history of science fiction, and we've even talked a little bit about the very problematic nature of defining science fiction, which is a great thing to start a row in a room full of academics. Most people are more concerned with what is not science fiction than what is, I suppose. There's one other thing that we're going to have a wee chat about, which is to do with Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series. If anybody's aware of this, there's been a puzzle out there on the internet for about 10, 11 years, considered almost unsolvable. And a few years back, I had a go at it with the idea of showing to my son that there's no such thing as an unsolvable problem. If you ever go have a look at his website and type in Sharp's father, you'll find that I was involved heavily in that. And as much as that there is now an answer to who is Sharp's father, it's a very unsatisfactory one. If you do a wee Google search on this, the Sharp novels, Sean Bean would be in them in the TV series. Go to the author's website, and he set a puzzle basically for not just his readers but everybody as to identify who was Sharp's father. And I think the puzzle went something like, take you out, put me in, and a small horse appears in this happy smuggler, I believe. It's a cryptic crossword clue. And I suppose I have a bit of a story to tell about that, which is quite interesting. But it's not that I came up with the answer, and it's not that neither did the author. but it's the fact that we forced the issue. I suppose possibly to the detriment of the author's mental health. But it's an interesting little story that I'd like to tell you at some point. So sometime in the future, we're going to have a wee chat about the big internet puzzle called Sharp's father. Who is Sharp's father? And my little role in it, if you like. So there we go, folks. Just having a wee look at the science fiction about that's around at the minute. I'm sure we're all watching a bit of telly tonight. We've got the I think the final series of The Expanse has hit. I've watched the first 2 episodes, and as always, very impressive. And I've just been watching Arcane on Netflix. I'm just coming up to the last episode, and I've absolutely loved it every second of it. What a fantastic anime. So it falls kind of into the steampunk science fantasy kind of realm, I suppose. So I maybe have a wee do a wee review about that at some point once we've finished it. So excuse me. So the idea tonight, really, folks, as I said, just to give you a wee bit of an idea of what's coming up over the next year and what we're about. If you're new to the station, if you have any questions or comments or just want to say hello, type away. And I hope you can all hear me okay. The idea was that we started yesterday discussing that we've done all the Dune videos and we've done countdowns down to the movie, and we've chatted fairly in depth about all things Frank Herbert's Dune. And in terms of me literally turning every single piece of work I've got in this thing, plus I suppose all the wee bits of side work that I've had around it, which resulted in things like the definitions of science fiction and the history of science, the brief history of science fiction. The one thing that we haven't kind of looked at, well, I've actually got 2 things I haven't presented to you. And once I have the OBS studio up and running, hopefully I'm going to be able to present the other one too, which would have been my first year Viva. In other words, a presentation. And the thing is that the interesting thing about that is that I suppose it contains an awful lot of stuff that got completely wiped out because at that point I switched my focus from Frank Herbert's writings, if you like, and went fully on at the Dune series. So I have a set of slides which are I might be, I suppose, enlightening to some people if you want to know what it's like to go through a Viva process on a PhD at 1 year. We have some of that stuff that hopefully we're going to present to you. So in the meantime, we it occurred to us that we have within this 100,000 word PhD, there's 10,000 extra words in footnotes, and we haven't really chatted about them. And as you watch the Dune Piled Higher and Deeper, the Dune PhD videos, whatever you want to call them, and we have them up in a few different formats for you, you'll see these numbers always appearing in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. And of course, they're now in the PhD, they're footnotes. And how we handled it in the videos is that we simply put numbers that hopefully should appear in the bottom right hand corner, and we go up to, I believe there's 555 of them, I think. And each one of those, at the end of each video, whether you're watching them individually or watching the collective videos where they're put together as chapters, then that gives you all the references, page references, websites, etc., etc. All those references are there, but they also contain little notes and things, little comments. And as I pointed out yesterday on the chat, that we were saying, for example, footnote 400. What you're seeing whenever footnote 400 appears, what you're getting is a quotation. And on the video, I'm reading that quotation. You're seeing it on the screen, and there's a wee footnote. And in particular, that footnote is one that I talked about highlighting. Please look at this, because what I'm saying is a quotation, but the reference actually demonstrates, if you go and read it, that what's being said is not true. So in terms of what the footnotes bring to the party, if you like, it's quite a bit. And in terms of how we've added images to the videos on the Dune series, every image has kind of been, we've tried to grab the right picture for what we're talking about every single time, or do our best to improvise, to bring another level of meaning to something that is essentially, I mean, a PhD, ultimately, if you were just reading it, it would be that on a page, and it would be very, very bland and probably tedious. And so turning them into videos has been, I think, really brought them to life, made them kind of interesting, I think, and adds a whole new sort of level of understanding to it. So with that in mind, we sort of chatted about the first footnote that was in the PhD. and it was a bit about how Frank Herbert had been relegated from what we call the Big Four, which is a term from science fiction historians, I suppose, particularly Brian Aldiss, who talks about in the book Trillion Year Spree and Billion Year Spree. We have he refers to this group of science fiction writers who are a super league of science fiction, and they're the Big Four. And as for me, for a long time, Frank Herbert, Isaac Asimov, Robert A. Heinlein, and Arthur C. Clarke were the Big Four. And as of around the year 2000, Frank got relegated. And again, if you check your Wikipedia pages, this is probably the case. The group became known as the Big Three. And this is done both by journalists and academics in an attempt to sort of forward their own books and rewrite their own histories and push their ideas. It's a kind of a thing. It's done in academia, and it's a bit nasty, I think, in some ways. It can be done, I suppose, correctly, but I think we pointed out a few of the sources there. If you want to go check out the Wikipedia articles on any of those four authors, you should find that Frank Herbert's not mentioned as part of the Big Four, and that the other three will have reference to them somewhere. And check the references, because I think it's probably to do with Carl Friedman's book. You'll find that they're identified as the Big Three. The identification was based on book sales. There's Grimdark Elven Lore Master. Hello, Grimdark. How are you? Thanks for joining us. Frank Herbert should be on a Mount Rushmore equivalent of Heine. Well, it's that. Sorry, just finish your quote there, Grimdark. Frank Herbert should be on a Mount Rushmore equivalent of Heinlein, Asimov, and Clarke. Couldn't agree more. It's the equivalent of having the four of them on Mount Rushmore. They were up there. They were the Big Four, Grimdark, and then someone's come along and just wiped them off. If you see what I mean. And excuse me, it's very much I'm going to write a book and I'm going to change this person's idea, going to rename it, make it my idea. And yeah, if you actually have a wee look, I've done it in one of my videos about the definitions of science fiction. I discuss some of this kind of spat, if you like, that actually went through a series of journals. And it kind of brought science fiction academia right down, really just sort of rock bottom, in my opinion. It was very poor, low quality sort of stuff, you know. So that was what our first footnote was. Yesterday, Grimdark was simply, we referenced the sort of fact that we also had picked this up. Footnote number one also discusses an obituary written for Arthur C. Clarke at the time. Where this started entering in the media, and we have the website reference on the first episode, guys, but you'll see it's a dead link, so which is indicative there's quite a few dead links within my work, which is indicative that the World Wide Web, in terms of using web pages, etc., for referencing, isn't a great idea. And certainly how we reference them, we have to put, they were last referenced, looked at on this date and time. Excuse me. But simply one of the things that I noticed, that there's not too many web addresses in my PhD, but I'd say well over 50% of them are dead links, which is not a sort of thing that you can really talk about when it comes to identifying the rest of your evidence. That book will still be in this library, this kind of thing, It's a bit strange. So we just basically talked about that, and we thought, and particularly it was bizarre, because if the Big Four were the Big Four based on book sales, then Frank, through Dune alone, one of the things that we're told, one of the lies actually that we're told about Frank Herbert's Dune, is that it's the best-selling science fiction book of all time. It's not even close, nowhere near. Now, it's quite possible that this big push for the film, etc., will bring the book to a brand new global audience, and that global audience is massive compared to what it's been in the past. But at the minute, it's not the best-selling science fiction book, and it never has been. It's been voted the most popular, and that's generally what most people run with it. So the other part of those two footnotes, really, that were of interest within the first part of the work, was we sort of said that it was just, in terms of the other writers, they were much more prolific, but in terms of scale of work, etc., Herbert was right there with them, and certainly in terms of book sales. It's completely wrong to remove him from that group, if you see what I mean. I think we've got a wee bit of news that Denis Villeneuve's heading for his next project after Dune, I think, will be Rendezvous with Rama. So he's approaching another one of the big four writers, Arthur C. Clarke's work, to provide us with a bit of vision. So, in terms of the next footnote that's in the work, folks, and I suppose this will be a bit random, but it's kind of heading through the PhD in a chronological order. So, in terms of where we're at, it's the introduction to Frank Herbert in Dune. And we have a bunch of footnotes that are just references. And the next, we have a little cluster of the next bunch that are of note. And I suppose we talk about some things within science fiction. And I think the next 3, 4, or 5 footnotes are of particular interest. So the first one here is, again, a PhD is meant to be understood by anyone. So we're kind of meant to explain everything and I know it seems almost a bit anal sometimes, but that is kind of the point. There shouldn't be a word or phrase that pops up in this PhD that if it doesn't have meaning to you, then it should be explained. It's as simple as that. I started to use the term Campbellian science fiction when we're referring to the output of all of these writers that were coming through the magazine era in particular. So just wanted to read you the footnote about what I called Campbellian science fiction. Some people refer to the magazine era, etc., but it was particularly to do with the writers under John W. Campbell Jr. So I'll just read you the footnote. It says, Campbellian science fiction can be seen as the era of magazine publications associated with the editorship of John W. Campbell, 1910 to 1971. During the golden age of science fiction, which we consider to be the 1930s to the end of the 50s. John W. Campbell was in particular associated with astounding stories, astounding science fiction, and analog, in addition to being credited with the discovery of many prominent science fiction writers. Campbell's prominence, and in conjunction with my own use of the term Campbellian, could be seen as from the late 1930s until the early 1960s. And I've said that Campbell is considered hugely influential in shaping the direction of stories and publication of golden age science fiction. So that was my wee sort of blurb on Campbell within the PhD. And it was really just to sort of give a sense that I was really trying to I couldn't say that I was talking about the golden age because that includes other magazines, other editors, etc., etc. So, it was really the best way we could sort of present what we were talking about and how we would refer to Campbellian science fiction. Now, this is particularly important whenever we get to Frank Herbert, because, of course, we know that Dune is a response to a particular type of hero protagonist that's coming out of these magazines. And there's a bit of a spat with John W. Campbell. Of course, for all Dune fans who know this, Dune Messiah was famously turned down, refused by John W. Campbell. And we have that conversation in our work. And I don't think they ever actually met, but I'm pretty sure it's a correspondence. And it's simply, Campbell has a very specific idea of what a superhuman, a particular type of protagonist, Ubermensch, what we call a Vaughtian Hero, I suppose, which is what we're going to get to in a minute. And it causes all sorts of problems with certain writers. And as I said, the next writer that we're approaching, so Herbert's Dune series is a kind of a response and an attack against not only this kind of science fiction, but particularly the protagonists that it is producing. And we're going to, as I said, we were briefly chatting earlier, Grimdark, at the start there, that we're heading into Alfred Bester territory soon. And I consider two of his novels in particular another response to Campbell, which is going to be really interesting because it's as I said, some people think of Dune as the greatest science fiction book ever written. There's a large school of people that think Tiger is the second best. A lot of people would argue it's better than Dune. And I'm a big fan of this book. So there's a lot more stuff out there that's not just a response by Frank Herbert to Campbell, I suppose. But famously, of course, he wouldn't publish Dune Messiah. Or, of course, Herbert is setting up his... he's setting up his readership for a fall, and it seems that Campbell didn't want to be a part of it. Now, the other term here I suppose this is to do with a wee bit of terminology in the footnotes here. These footnotes all at this part run together, and it's really to do with introducing the golden age of science fiction, what was going on in it. And in particular, as I have said here in the PhD, it says that Herbert was a great advocate for science fiction, but early in his writing career, he had not intended to stay in that genre. He wanted to go somewhere else. And knowing as he did, and this is the quote, that that he used, it was considered a literary ghetto by many, unquote. That's Frank talking. Um, and how in particular he was iconoclastic towards this era of science fiction. And ultimately, the basis of my work suggests that, excuse me, ultimately his work is a bridge, between the golden age and the new wave, and it's an attempt to separate away and pull away, but do something else altogether new with science fiction to create a new type of literature. And it has. I think the one thing about Dune is it's a book of note, even in the mid to late 60s. It's whoa, what's this? And suddenly we do have an explosion of writers who are this what we call the new wave, just heading out of what I call the Campbellian mindset, if you like. So the other thing is, I suppose, that we have what the Campbellian hero. We have a particular type of heroes that are appearing in science fiction. So my next two footnotes are on the Edisonian hero and the Van Vaughtian hero. And funnily enough, folks, I don't know if there's any Rick and Morty fans out there. And I'm a big Rick and Morty fan, and I've been compared to Rick, and I feel sorry for my son in that manner. But there is what we call the Edisonian. I think Rick is the ultimate. It's evolved again, and Rick has become the ultimate form of the Edisonian. So I'll quickly tell you what an Edisonian is here. This is footnote 36 in the PhD, and we're still down probably in episode 4 on the Golden Age. And this is quite important in science fiction. It's got a lot of imitators, and I'm going to show you a wee bit more. Once again, you're going to see how science fiction academics get up to their nonsense here. And I think I've pointed this out, but this, here we go. The term Edisonian heroes, first coined by John Clute, and is used in regard to the Robinsonian hero, a term used to reflect the many imitators of Daniel Defoe's, and I've got the full title here of Robinson Crusoe, but I'm not going, oh, what the hell, do you know what, I'll go for it. Here we go, you ready, folks? Daniel Defoe's The Life and Strange Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe of York, Mariner, who lived 28 years all alone in an uninhabited island on the coast of America near the mouth of the great river of Orinoco, having been cast on shore by shipwreck, wherein all the men perished but himself, with an account how he was at last strangely delivered by pirates, written by himself, 1719, better known as Robinson Crusoe. There you go. I don't think you won't get many people reading the full title of Robinson Crusoe out. Thought it was worth a go, folks. So the Edisonian term is based, just to back up, on the Robinsonian, which is based on Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, which had many imitators. The Edisonian hero would come to dominate science fiction right through until the 1960s, and it was in part the idealized and stagnating form of protagonist that Frank Herbert attempted to undermine in Dune. Notably, and this is a good wee note, I think, notably Edison himself is an Edisonian hero in Garrett P. Service's Edison's Conquest of Mars, published in 1898, which is a sequel to an unofficial reworking of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds, called Fighters from Mars, The War of the Worlds, in and near Boston. And there's a wee web address for this here. I think it's still available online, this link, and you'll find it on the end of episode 4. Just as for more information, transcript of the first part of this story from the Boston Evening Post newspaper. So the Edisonian hero is a thing, and you'll find the definition of it within the actual work itself, and it's up there. I disagree with it entirely. Very simply put, because it's about the Edisonian hero is. Let me see if we can find it. I think. Oh, actually, we're early on. Sorry, folks. That'll be at the end of chapter 2. This is all biography to do with Frank Herbert. Excuse me. So basically, John Clute, etc. These people are associated with the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, which is a work of massive bias. It's as an academic work, it's an absolute failure, I think, in terms of it's loaded with bias. It's a great reference book, don't get me wrong, and I use it a lot, but the bias in it is so obvious, and the self-promotion is so obvious that it really brings it down in terms of level as an academic work. I think I point out that you'll see stuff about Dune within it And the article that you're reading within the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction second edition is written particularly, and has initials who's responsible for the author or for the article. And you'll find that the person slagging it off and then recommending Brian Stableford's work. The person who wrote that article is actually Brian Stapleford. So an appalling, absolutely appalling level of bias and self-promotion, and kicking over other people's work. So it's a great reference book, don't get me wrong. Very useful for finding stuff, but information, and it should be totally taken with a pinch of salt. So we're talking about why Dune, Paul Atreides is a response to a particular type of hero. So this Edisonade hero is your kind of, I suppose, your kind of inventor hero. And the one thing that they'll say within this definition is that, oh no, this has to be an American lighting out for new territory with his new tech. And then I think you'll find that they go on to say that it's absolutely not in any way based on Daedalus from Greek mythology. And no, you can't say Daedalus is an inventor hero, which is just stupid. And as I said, some of the things that come out of the science fiction academic community are beyond belief sometimes. So of course, the idea that the ancient Greeks didn't light out for new territory, and it's all very, very poor, I think. And it's again an attempt. I'm going to be the guy that coined the Edisonade term, and then I'm going, etc. And it's a bit like sort of course, Daedalus is the inventor hero, and we could even go to Archimedes as well. Do you know what I mean? But to say that this type of hero must be an American, ping, we've got you. Why? And then to deliberately point out, and me with my classical mythology, my classical history, etc., to point out a mythological and historical Greek who fit that pattern and say you can't talk about them, don't look at them, please don't look at them. Appallingly stupid. And that's it, So the Edisonade, Robinson Crusoe, by the way, if anybody hasn't read it, I read it when I was a kid. It's a primary school reading for me, and great book. Love it. It's not the sort of thing I think I'd ever come back to, but I remember really, really enjoying it as a little kid. I loved it. And this takes us on to our next footnote, which, of course, so I suppose the Edisonade hero within the likes of science fiction gets relegated after a while. He becomes the inventor hero, becomes the sidekick, doesn't he? So we get our Flash Gordons and our Buck Rogers, our sci-fi scrappers, as I like to call them, who basically solve all their problems by punching, shooting, or blowing stuff up. The Vaughtian hero then, as our next footnote, just to talk about. Again, this is all about I suppose early on about Frank Herbert's response. These wee footnotes within the PhD just says that the Van Vaughtian hero represents a paradigm shift in science fiction protagonists and is essentially an Ubermensch, named after the science fiction writer Alfred Eaton Van Vogt, who featured a number of such protagonists. And we have at the end of this to see chapter 3, which is our chapter on the hero, for more details. So it's just about giving you a wee bit of definitions as to these things. And very interestingly, as I said, guys, if you think about Rick and Morty, what Rick is, Rick has turned it. The character of Rick has taken the Edisonade, the Van Vaughtian, all of it, and slapped it quite hard on its face. And you've got the return of the Edisonade hero in Rick, but he's something else. He's also the action hero. And arguably, you could say he's also an anti-hero and a bit of a villain in some ways. I'm very, very fond of Rick and Morty, I have to say. It's very good. But it very much occurred to me that the idea of this Edisonade and the Van Vaughtian, we've had another change in it. And if we look at Rick as a science fiction character, he's something very new in the sense of what we have in terms of the inventor hero. So that actually, those footnotes were actually due with chapter 2, which was just our sort of introduction to all the work on Dune. And as I said, I hope some people maybe not know what a Robinsonade, what an Edisonade is. You'll find loads of examples within science fiction literature, as I said, and to me, the stereotypical, the refusal to say, oh, well, the Edisonade is based on Robinson Crusoe, that there's no archetype within the ancient world, is kind of appalling sort of stuff. Really, it's very sloppy work, and it's just designed for self promotion. And don't get me wrong, by the way, folks. As much as we talk about Herbert's protagonist, it's a bit like what I said about what do we call him? Lord Raglan's book on the hero the other day. Just because he didn't get things right doesn't make it a bad book. And in fact, I'd argue I love the book The Hero by Lord Raglan. I think it's a great book. I don't agree with him, but it's not me slagging that book off. I really did want to point that out the other day because I love the book so much, and because I often refer to it professionally in a way that I don't agree with what's in it. It certainly is a book that led me to an awful lot of places, and it's a reasoned, intelligent work, you know. So just because something has an element to it doesn't mean it's bad, and it's the same as much as you've heard me discuss Alfred A. Van Vought's, books in regards to the Vaughtian Hero. Doesn't mean they're rubbish at all. Give them a read. I've got a few here. I've got one I haven't read downstairs called The Changeling, by A. Van Vogt. And certainly in terms of secondhand books and things, again, he's an author that I wouldn't have caught too much of, but would have seen the odd text when I was younger, and kind of went, ooh, one of those authors that I've always been interested in reading over the years. Finally got a bit into way back. He's grand. It's not a slag in any way, and it's not how I really operate, as you've probably figured out. So there we go. But I did quite enjoy reading the full title of Robinson Crusoe. I think that was a good laugh. So our next footnotes of any worth really are moving into the biography of Frank Herbert. It's just to do with, I suppose, the awards and things like that. So the first two footnotes within the biography are really Frank Herbert's seminal science fiction work is the Hugo and Nebula award-winning Dune. And the footnotes here are basically explaining what the Hugo and Nebulas are. So just to run you through this quickly, this is footnote number 39 in the PhD, and this will be in the third episode. So just to say, the Hugo Awards, also known as the Science Fiction Achievement Award, are the science fiction equivalent of the Oscars, and they're named after Hugo Gernsback, considered to be the founding father of the science fiction magazine era, which began in the 1920s. They were first held in 1953, and Dune was the joint winner for Best Novel in 1966, along with And Call Me Conrad by Roger Zelazny, which was published in 1965. And was ultimate. And my other note here says that, and this is one I haven't read, by the way, and I've read short stories by Roger Zelazny. This And Call Me Conrad was published in novel form by This Immortal in 1966. But I've read a collection of his short stories. And I've read Lord of Light. Actually, Lord of Light's a good one. And I don't know if you know about, there's a science fiction story, and I used to think it was written by Roger Zelazny, but it's not. It's actually written by Asimov, and I think it's called Spell My Name with an S. One of my all-time favorite stories, and I think it was to do with a discussion between Asimov and Zelazny about where their books appeared on the bookshelf in terms of alphabetical order. Asimov's right at the front, poor old Roger Zelazny. You've probably bought a book by the time you get to Z in the science fiction shelves. It was an idea that made me think, oh. So the story's about, I suppose the real life story, I think, was that Asimov, if I'm right, and Zelazny kind of had a chat. Maybe a kind of thing that was done by certain immigrants into America, that you not fancy changing one letter of your name. How about Zelazny to Selazny? And I think obviously Roger didn't do it and was happy enough with his own name. And I think the idea gave I'm pretty sure you must check this up, folks, but I'm pretty sure it's a story called Spell My Name with an S for Sierra. And it's kind of about what happens to somebody who just does this, makes a little change. And it's a kind of Cold War paranoia story. And I really, really like it, because part of me enjoyed it so much because I knew that there was kind of a real world situation behind it, and it was kind of a harmless one. So there we go. That's just a wee bit about the Hugos. Excuse me. And our next note there, and I don't even know if this is of interest to you folks or not, but I thought we'd give it a go anyway. The next one is Frank Herbert's Dune is the first ever winner of the Nebula Awards for Best Novel when they debuted in 1965. The Nebula Awards are handed out by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America Incorporated, the SFWA. So there we go. So that's a kind of in-house one. I think, I'm not too sure. I don't follow the awards. I think there's been some controversy within the Hugos and things like that. And again, it's all sorts of things to do with academia, I think, within science fiction. Science fiction as a body of work, in terms of academia, still sits outside the rest of the literary world, I suppose. Although it's very much a genre fiction, I think there's certain things that they do, to be honest, that make it get taken less seriously. Sometimes, it's a bit sad. But what have we got here? Oh, and this was a wee note that was in the. Now, whenever I started writing this, I suppose this was put together in probably 2010. We have a wee note. It was just about, we were talking about Dune not being the best-selling science fiction book, but it is the most popular. And the wee thing that I have here is this status was confirmed again in a recent poll of the top 5 science fiction books as chosen by New Scientist readers. And Dune came first. Now that was New Scientist, particularly referencing the science fiction, your all-time favorites in New Scientist itself, which I used to read. Excuse me. And it just says this article is one of it. That particular episode, George A, 2008, New Science Fiction all-time favorites, published in it'll be the 15th of November 2008 episode. For anybody who wants to check it out in the library. This article is one of a series that appears in New Scientist at that point, and the whole edition examines a number of aspects of science fiction literature and movies and looks at the current state of science fiction and questions if science fiction is in decline. So it's an episode of edition of New Scientist that focuses very heavily on science fiction and particularly talks about Dune. So if anybody is interested in that was published on the 15th of November 2008. Has a whole bunch of stuff in there, and it's about what scientists like in science fiction. So as I said, that's a good 12, 13 years away now. So interestingly enough, I suppose. I'm sure there's been many polls conducted since, I don't know what you think about book polls sometimes. The one that really sort of struck me most a long time ago was, I think, around the turn of the millennium. And I think it might have been the Independent newspaper over here in the UK. It was the Independent or the Guardian, one of the two, and they did a list of the top 100 books of the 20th century. And the way they did it was they listed the 100 best books of the 20th century and the 100 worst books of the 20th century. And what was really interesting was that the same book occupied number one. And I'm trying to remember what it was. James Joyce. Same book occupied the same position, best book and worst book. And I'm just trying to remember if it was Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses. I can't remember. I just thought that was really funny. Number of books by Ian Banks, quite high on that list, I suppose. But it was an interesting wee list, I suppose. We always do these kind of things. And the next comment that we have really was to do with Arthur C. Clarke's selling line for Dune. If you've got a copy of Dune, possibly, quite probably, somewhere on it, you should see the following sentence. Unique amongst science fiction novels in the depth of its characterization and the extraordinary detail of the world it creates, I know nothing comparable to it except The Lord of the Rings. So that's Arthur C. Clarke's comment on Dune. And the note here just really discusses the fact that it's quoted on the back of just about every edition of Dune, and probably one of the work's better selling points, certainly within the realms of the science fiction community. So yeah, very little has been done to the Dune book over the years in terms of improving it or fixing errata in it, or even adding, I suppose, from my own point of view, probably for anybody's point of view, there's a dictionary of terminology of the Imperium in the first Dune book, but it's sadly lacking in all the other Dune novels. If I was in charge of the publishing thing, I'd sort that out. I'd update it for each book, because there's a fair amount of blurb stuff that would help. I suppose we're always getting new words, and language evolves within the Dune universe. For example, we start off with Arrakis, and then I suppose it becomes Rakis, if you see what I mean. Gidi Prime becomes Gamu. There's changes that could be quite confusing. I think a wee dictionary would certainly be of use. So that's the first couple of footnotes that we have there, folks. I'm going to take a wee sip of fluids. If anybody's got any wee questions for me, fire away. As I said, they're not all corkers or anything like that, but what I thought I would just do is go through them. Not going to really look at any particular references or anything, which make up the bulk of them. But we do have some interesting little tidbits, and I suppose it meant to sort of help out a wee bit with some general knowledge on science fiction expertise. Excuse me. And I've just got another wee note here that we're into the golden age. If anyone is interested, I have made a wee comment on the career of John W. Campbell. If anybody's particularly interested in having a look at him, I've recommended a book here in the footnotes, and it's by A.I. Berger. That's Berger, and it's published in 1993. The book's called The Magic That Works, John W. Campbell and the American Response to Technology, and that's published by the Borgo Press San Bernardino. So just moving through the history of sort of the golden age of science fiction. Whenever I put this into the PhD, I suppose it was the reason for it. I don't particularly want to head off and talk about the history of science fiction here or there. Anyway, I really need to get about my business. And we're Frank Herbert's Dune, let's go. We couldn't do that. It was so important to put him in his place and his time. And to fundamentally show, ultimately, he might start off at the end of the golden age, dipping his toe in there, but he's very quickly turned against it. And the interesting thing that after reading a lot of new wave science fiction, I often found it hard to put him in that category as well. The fundamental part of the thesis that I came to was that he doesn't really belong in either. The idea that Herbert's a Janus facing. Dune is a Janus facing work. Hello, Rolando. Rolando Santa says, "What are your thoughts on the Dune Encyclopedia? How it works with the novels?" Thank you. Thank you very much for your question, Rolando. Thanks for joining us. I love it. We got a copy sitting here somewhere. It should be. You're probably seeing it on the shelf behind me, but I'm sometimes a wee bit oblivious to what's here. I keep bringing books up. Frank Herbert's. This is going to be like pantomime. You'll be going, "It's behind you." I can't see it there off the top of my head. Yeah, I really like Rolando. I really like the Dune Encyclopedia. I think it's a wonderful book. And I have some. Quite. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. I think it's a great book, actually. I'll tell you something. Arguably, and what it actually is a piece of fan fiction. And it's not just. I think I've commented before on it. It's sad that I can't see where my copy is. It's not just Professor Willis E. McNally working on it. There's a whole bunch of people at it. Excuse me. And it's a delightful book. And I think what's been done to it, Rolando, is really sad. I think there was some sort of legal action in regards to this book by the Herbert estate. I kind of almost reads this, and don't we tell you, "Oh, my book is not." It felt horrible. My book is not canon. I accept that it's not canon. It was kind of that thing. So the thing is, I suppose the the introduction to it is by Frank Herbert himself, who talks about it and says that he's as the first Dune fan, and he highly recommends it. And there's conversations between Frank and Bev and Professor Willis McNally. I think they're online nowadays. I used to, when I was doing this work, I had to work with a transcript. Bear with me one wee second. Let's see. If I can find it. I was definitely here a wee bit. I don't know, I'll just get the thing and talk about it and have a wee nosy if I can. Is it hiding somewhere? Let's see. Oh, the goodness. Is it on the floor? Oh, absolutely terrible on me. No, I'm sorry, folks. I can't see it. It should be right behind me, but I've that many books brought up. I'll tell you what, Rhonda, the next time we're on live, I'll try and get it sitting there and we can have a wee chat about it. I think it's a great book. It's full of wonderful illustrations. It really is it's an encyclopedia, and it comes across that way. And I'll tell you what I particularly love about it is it feels right. It feels like it belongs in the Dune universe. It has that sense of style about it, and I think one of the things that a lot of people talk about the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson books is that they don't have that. For me, the problem with them anyway was that they don't have that authorial voice. They don't sound like Frank Herbert, and you don't get that with the Dune Encyclopedia. It does. It sounds right. It has that, and again, maybe it's because it's being written from the sort of historian perspective, which is similar to the way that Dune itself is actually written. But I think it's great. My understanding is it's almost impossible to buy. I have my own copy. I've had it for a long, long time. I bought it years and years ago. And I have often just sat, and from my own point of view, just sat and flicked through it because I read encyclopedias like that and stuff like that. And you're saying, Rolando, I find it true to form, as it were. The flavor is right. Absolutely. I think Frank was a big fan of it, to be honest with you. And he says so in his introduction. That's why I was looking for the book itself. I'll dig it out for next time. We can have a chat about it. It's probably right behind me and I can't see it. But it's a fun book. Well, as much as I love encyclopedias, if you were reading the Frank Herbert's original Dune books, you'd be an absolutely great companion. Wouldn't spoil it in any way. Adds a lot to it, I think, and particularly with the reader's imagination, how the Dune universe works. There's an awful lot that we don't see and an awful lot that's not explained. And I think little books like that are a gem, absolute gem. But in terms of what it is to Dune readers and Dune fans, I think it's one thing. As I said, it has its own little place in history. I think it's an endeavor of fan fiction, really. And I know it's got academic level sort of people behind it, but ultimately it's a thing of love, is what I got out of it. And not only did the people who worked on it loved it and loved doing it, but Frank Herbert loved it. And I think discusses, his introduction. I reserve, to write my own stories in my own way. But this, as I fully endorse it, and he did fully endorse it, but just reserved the right to do his own thing with his story, as far as it went. So I think it's very good. It's got illustrations and they kind of sort of line up. I'm not too sure who the illustrator is, but they line up to some of the original Dune publications. If you know the way Dune was published in analog as Dune World, some of the illustrations like that. You get things like the Dune Tarot. Some of them are illustrated in there. All sorts of little things, chronologies of the, I think it's a thing of. I think it's a thing to be praised. I think it comes from a good place. I think it's a thing of love. I think it's a thing of quality. And I think Frank loved it. And I think Dune fans love it. I love it. And anybody I know who's got a copy loves it as a Dune fan. and it's available to people on PDF, etc. If you know someone who's got a copy, I've got a copy on PDF. But my understanding is whatever deal was done, you'll not see it in book form again. And I don't know if it was it was one of those things that I don't know. It comes across in a bit of a villainous light, shall we say? It's a bit like the we were talking about Hercules Returns a wee while back. This film about how the evil Empire Cinema tries to shut down the small little cinema, that kind of thing. It had that just the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. We're the legit Dune, no one else is allowed in, and we're shutting you down legally. It's as simple as that. And I don't know the Herberts or anything like that, but Professor McNally is the person who delivered Frank Herbert's eulogy. I got a sense that they were very friendly, and as I said, there's interviews between them, a full transcript about an hour and a half to do with this on. I think it's on YouTube, so if you want to have a wee look at it, but it's yeah. Thank you for asking. I think it's a thing that doesn't get a lot of attention, and it's a if you're a Dune fan, I would say it's a must-have if you love the books. And you'll see why if you've not looked at it. Once you just flick it, you can just open it anywhere and just go, all right, and you start reading, and yeah, as you say, the flavor's right, but it sounds right. It sounds as if it belongs in the Dune universe, and that was my big problem for the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson books. And as we've talked, we've just quoted you about Frank talking about literature being in the gutter. Low quality, and Dune being a deliberate attempt to bring it out of the gutter, to make a piece of literature. And I look at the, I look at the 6 Dune books as a really quality endeavor within literature itself. And I'd argue this way. I put it this way, that people have, well done. We're going to be talking to Cara Kennedy on Monday night about her PhD on Dune. People will do a PhD on Dune. They'll not do one on Brian Herbert's Dune books. That's not going to happen, I don't think. Or if it would have to be involving pulp fiction of some kind. Or I call fiction like that pulp fiction. By the way, I know it's not the correct term, but that's still how I look at it. So thank you very much for the question, Rolando. Yeah, I love it. I don't think you'll get many people who've got a copy that would disagree. It is and it's a lovely book. It's got a beautiful cover. It's a well-made book. A lot of books I have of a certain age or over, their bindings, etc., start to fall apart. That kind of thing, But it is a genuine joy to behold. I have a lot of books down here on the floor at the minute, just because of the doggies. Not that I ill-treat my books that badly. It's going to be one of those things that as soon as we stop streaming, I'm going to turn around and go, there it is, that kind of thing. But my Frank Herbert stuff's all up. Oh, there it is! For God's sake, there you go. I just knew that would happen. I should have just remembered where all the Frank Herbert stuff is. I'm so sorry, Rolando. There's my copy there. I bought it secondhand a long time ago, and you can probably see I have it taped up to keep it good. So it's got, it's used. I read books. And even just thinking about the text is pretty good. The level of illustrations, etc. What I was going to read to you, hopefully here, compiled by Dr. Willis E. McNally. Snippets. And of course we have Harry Bonotto as I suppose the fictional editor. And we have you would absolutely love this, I suppose. And I think you'd probably love it more if you were unaware of the Brian Herbert extended universe. I'll just give you Frank Herbert's words on it if you like, guys, just quickly. I'm sure maybe a lot of you don't have this book. Stephen Campbell I still have at least one of your books. I'm sure you do, Stevie. Here's a rich background and foreground for the Dune Chronicles, including scholarly bypass and amusing sidelights. Some of the contributions are sure to arouse controversy, based as they are on questionable sources. Others round out long speculation. Specialists have had their field day here with problems geological, biological, astronomical, and mystical, with pronunciations, major biographies, histories, and accounts of little known figures. The range of topics is Catholic. Cross reference from games for amusement to games of life and death, Cheops or pyramid chess to the Assassin's Handbook. The history of the financial synod which spawned Chom gets its first airing in these pages. In fact, many secrets hidden in the Dune Chronicles are answered here. How did Irulan first gain and then arouse the displeasure of Ganima? Who was Jehan Butler, and why does the Butlerian Jihad carry her name? What are the hidden origins of the Spacing Guild? Where did spice transnavigational techniques develop? What was Leto II's private opinion of Holy Sister Quintinius Violet Chinoe? Does Cheops have something in common with the three-body problem? I must confess that I found it fascinating to re-enter here some of the sources on which the Chronicles are built. As the first Dune fan, I give this encyclopedia my delighted approval, although I hold my own counsel on some of the issues still to be explored as the Chronicles unfold. Frank Herbert, Port Townsend, November 1983. So there you go. And that was that. So yeah, thanks, Rolando. That's the Dune Encyclopedia. As I said, I think you'd be very hard pressed to get a copy of this these days. And I understand they're selling for quite a lot of money, stupid money, if you see what I mean. And I do have it on PDF. So I've said if anybody would like a copy, send me an email to the station. I'll forward it to you. I think it has to be done through a sort of Google Documents link because it's quite a chunky file. But if anybody is after a copy, simply because you're not going to be able to buy it, I think your secondhand copies is your best bet. But you know, it's there we go. There's the Dune Tarot, for example, within this book. You know, and just in terms of a lot of ideas being brought to life visually as well for the first time, it's got all sorts of things. And it's a pretty thorough book, and I think it kind of is meant to really cover the first four possibly Dune books, or be written within that period. I think. Yeah, I mean the God Emperor is mentioned here, so, but I don't think it would cover anything to do with the Bene Gesserit books, etc. You know. So there we go, folks. So we've taken you through a few wee sort of bits and pieces there tonight with some of the footnotes. As I said, we're going to call it a wee bit early tonight, but that takes us up to the new wave of science fiction and to see what other little sort of tidbits and weird things that we've got buried in here. There's stuff on all sorts of things, but it's again, it's just designed to sort of help our understanding with any little things within it. Some of them will probably be quite bland, but I just thought it'd be an interesting wee way of sort of spreading the topics about. Have you even tried Roger Amber? Diane was sterilized by whom? Amber was Galaxy magazine. Have you ever tried Roger Amber? He was sterilized by whom? No. Amber was. I don't know. The name doesn't ring a bell actually, Rolando. I don't think. I've read quite a lot of science fiction writers over the years. Who their works would be in collections of stories, and I have a really bad memory for those kind of names. I tend to remember stories. Let's have a wee look. Friends of Amber by Roger Zelazny. I got you right. Okay, let's have a wee look. No, I have not at all. No, quite a lot of them there. No, as I said, Roger Zelazny is one of those writers who I've read a chunk of his short stories. And in particular, I've been actually, do you know something? I've been after a particular volume of his short stories for years because I read it when I was a kid, and I absolutely want another copy of it. It was that good, and I couldn't even describe it to you. But Lord of Lights is the one book of his that I've read, and I really enjoyed it and would highly recommend it. But as to whatever the collection of short stories that I read of his, I don't know what it would have been called. See, if I knew what it was called, I'll go out and buy it. And I'm just having a wee sort of look through. But the Last Defender of no. That's a Twilight Zone episode, isn't it? Oh, what? Do you know what? Hang on. I think I've just found it. Possibly the thing I'm talking about is The Last Defender of Camelot, a book. And it is a TV, it is a Twilight Zone episode, but it looks like something different. But there we go. But no, Roger Zelazny is can't spell Zelda. Roger Zelazny, yeah, he's Dean was started by whom? Where was Galaxy Magazine? Roger Zelazny is definitely an author. Based on what I've read, the one collection of short stories, probably caught the odd thing by him over the years. But Lord of Light's an absolute cracker of a book. I'll be definitely doing a video on it at some point. So definitely somebody I'd look forward to reading a wee bit more of, Rolando, to be honest with you. So there we go. But listen, folks, we're going to call it a night tonight, just because we've just hit the hour. We had a wee pop on last night, but we are back on Monday at 9 o'clock for our book launch with Dr. Cara Kennedy. So for anybody, particularly if you're fans of the Bene Gesserit, we're going to have a wee Q&A with Dr. Cara Kennedy on her book, Women's Agency in the Dune Universe. So she'll be joining me at 9 o'clock here on the station GMT. That's Monday, the 20th of December. And we'll be taking questions and answers afterwards from you guys here. So if you've got any questions or anything or any ideas for that, let me know. But it should be quite a nice, relaxed thing. We're going to be chatting all about her book, and particularly as a book that focuses heavily on the Bene Gesserit for anybody who's a particular fan of that. So I quite like where this little journey took us tonight. Just let's have a look at some footnotes to do with the Dune Ph.D. and see where they take us. And as I said, we've got plenty coming up over the next year and so on. So I hopefully will, if you can join me at 9 o'clock GMT on Monday, I would be delighted. For a bit more of more in-depth Dune talk, particularly, as I said, looking at women's agency in the Dune universe, really focusing on the Bene Gesserit. So that should be fun. And as I said, I hope you can join us. In the meantime, folks, I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Thanks very much for joining me, and look after yourselves. Take care now, and see you soon. Bye-bye.